Costa Concordia. On January 13th, 2012, the Tuscan coastline near Giglio Island became the scene of one of the most catastrophic cruise ship accidents in modern maritime history. The Costa Concordia, a 952-foot vessel carrying more than 4,200 passengers and crew, veered dangerously close to shore in what investigators later called an unauthorized deviation. The ship was traveling at more than 15 knots when its hull scraped a submerged rock formation, tearing open a 50-meter gash along the port side. The impact was instantaneous and violent. Lights flickered. Dishes crashed from tables. Passengers described hearing a deep metallic roar echoing through the decks. Water rushed into the lower compartments with such force that engines, generators, and control systems were disabled within minutes. As the ship rolled sharply to its starboard side, hallways became slanted corridors. Elevators jammed. Furniture slid across the floor with growing momentum. Dozens of passengers were thrown off their feet as the vessel listed beyond 20 degrees. Evacuation procedures collapsed almost immediately. Some lifeboats on the higher side of the ship couldn't be lowered at all. Others became jammed at extreme angles. Crew members shouted contradictory instructions, adding confusion to panic. Families were separated as crowds surged toward muster stations that were already underwater. Within an hour, the 114,000-ton ship was lying on its side, half submerged, windows dipping below the surface. Rescue teams from the Italian Coast Guard arrived to find people clinging to railings, jumping into the cold January water, or trapped behind tilted bulkheads. Investigators later concluded the accident stemmed from a combination of reckless navigation, inadequate training, and a failure to understand how quickly the vessel was flooding. The Concordia remained partially submerged for years, becoming a symbol of how a single decision can sink a modern cruise liner. For thousands aboard, the calm of a Mediterranean evening had turned into one of the most terrifying nights in maritime history. Viking Sky engine failure. On March 23, 2019, the coast of Norway's Hustadvika region, one of the most treacherous stretches of water in Scandinavia, became the backdrop for a near-catastrophic loss of control aboard the Viking Sky cruise ship. The vessel was carrying 1,373 passengers and crew when the engines suddenly shut down during a severe storm. Wind gusts of more than 40 knots and towering waves struck the ship broadside, causing it to drift helplessly toward underwater reefs. Inside, chaos unfolded. As the ship rolled up to 30 degrees, entire dining rooms were thrown into disarray. Glass shattered. Tables toppled. Sofas slid across carpets like loose cargo. Passengers were slammed against walls or pinned under falling furniture. With no propulsion, the Viking Sky moved closer to the rocky shoreline with every swell. Crew members broadcast urgent messages, instructing passengers to brace for impact. But the wind howled so loudly that many could not hear the announcements over the sound of the storm. The captain issued a mayday. Norwegian rescue authorities launched one of the most complex evacuation missions in the country's modern history. Helicopters battled hurricane-force winds as they hoisted passengers one by one from the violently rocking ship's deck. Inside the vessel, emergency lights flickered with the motion. Water surged through broken doors and windows. Just when the hull was less than a kilometer from land, engineers succeeded in restarting one of the engines, slowing the drift. Hours later, additional power was restored, allowing tugboats to assist in stabilizing the vessel. The accident was later traced to critically low lubricating oil levels that triggered an automatic shutdown. A single parameter, barely noticed, had brought a luxury cruise liner to the brink of disaster. For those aboard, the line between safety and catastrophe had narrowed to a matter of meters. Carnival Splendor Fire. On November 8, 2010, a massive engine room fire aboard the Carnival Splendor left nearly 4,500 people drifting without power in the Pacific Ocean. The ship was en route from Long Beach, California, when a failure in one of the diesel generators caused a cascading electrical short. Within seconds, flames erupted in the aft engine room. Automatic suppression systems activated, but the fire spread along fuel lines faster than expected, forcing the crew to seal off multiple compartments. The consequences were immediate. Lights went dark. Air conditioning systems shut down. Water pumps, refrigeration units, and kitchen operations all failed simultaneously. Passengers woke to the smell of smoke and the sudden stillness of a ship no longer moving. Engineers fought desperately to contain the blaze, but with the cooling systems offline, temperatures soared beyond safe limits. Without propulsion, the Splendor drifted further from the Mexican coastline, caught in ocean currents while the crew attempted to stabilize remaining electrical systems. For passengers, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food spoiled in warm kitchens. Toilets backed up without functioning pumps. Hallways became humid tunnels lit only by backup emergency lights. The smell of diesel, smoke, and stagnant air filled cabins. The U.S. Navy eventually airdropped supplies, while tugboats were dispatched to tow the powerless ship toward San Diego. The journey took days. Investigators later identified multiple vulnerabilities in the electrical layout that allowed a single generator failure to shut down the entire vessel. A routine voyage had transformed into a drifting city, stranded at sea by a fire hidden deep within the machinery spaces. Empress of the North. On May 14, 2007, the narrow, glacier-carved passages of Alaska's icy strait became the stage for a navigational mistake that left the Empress of the North stranded and rapidly taking on water. The vessel, a 360-foot sternwheeler designed for scenic tours, was carrying 281 passengers and crew during a night voyage south of Juneau. The waters of Icy Strait are notorious for concealed rocky outcrops, hazards that demand precise chart reading and constant vigilance. At 12:35 a.m., the ship deviated slightly from its intended course. Investigators later suggested that the officer on watch misinterpreted radar echoes in the darkness. The error was small, just a few degrees. But in waters this narrow, a deviation of even a minute amount can have catastrophic consequences. Minutes later, the hull struck a submerged rock formation. The grounding was sudden and jarring. Passengers felt the entire ship shudder beneath them. Some described hearing a deep, grating noise as steel scraped against stone. Water intrusion alarms activated as the lower compartments began to flood. The vessel listed to one side, causing chairs and personal belongings to slide across the slanted floors. Crew members distributed life jackets as they guided passengers toward outdoor decks, illuminated only by emergency lighting. The U.S. Coast Guard responded with helicopters and rescue cutters. Lifeboats ferried stranded passengers away from the disabled vessel, battling cold winds off the Alaskan coastline. Later analysis revealed a combination of officer fatigue, poor nighttime visibility, and over-reliance on radar instead of visual navigation. A single wrong turn in dark Alaskan waters had transformed a scenic midnight voyage into a race against rising seawater. Star Princess Fire. On March 23, 2006, the Caribbean Sea witnessed one of the fastest-spreading fires ever to occur aboard a modern cruise ship. The Star Princess, carrying more than 3,800 people, was sailing south of Jamaica when a small, almost invisible hazard triggered a chain reaction that engulfed multiple decks. The spark came from a single balcony. Investigators later determined that a cigarette, left smoldering on a plastic balcony chair, ignited synthetic materials that burned hotter and faster than traditional furnishings. At 3:10 a.m., passengers in adjacent cabins smelled smoke. Within minutes, the fire leapt from balcony to balcony, driven by strong winds funneling along the ship's exterior corridors. Dark smoke began seeping into interior hallways as alarm systems activated. Inside the ship, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Cabin lights flickered. Smoke poured through ventilation gaps. Fire doors slammed shut automatically. Passengers woke to choking air and the muffled sounds of shouting from the decks outside. Crew members fought to contain the flames as burning debris fell from higher balconies. Some areas reached temperatures hot enough to melt railings and warp metal. Firefighters aboard the ship worked in narrow corridors filled with dense smoke, using hoses and extinguishers to create a barrier against the advancing flame front. It took hours to fully suppress the blaze. Entire sections of the ship's starboard side were charred and unrecognizable. 79 cabins were destroyed. The aftermath triggered a sweeping redesign of balcony furniture across the cruise industry, flame-retardant materials, stricter smoking controls, and improved fire barriers. A single cigarette had become the ignition point for one of the most destructive cruise ship fires of the modern era. MS Estonia sinking. On September 28, 1994, the cold waters of the Baltic Sea witnessed one of the most catastrophic civilian maritime accidents of the 20th century. The MS Estonia, carrying 989 passengers and crew, departed from Tallinn on an overnight journey to Stockholm, an otherwise routine crossing through rough but navigable seas. Shortly after midnight, the weather worsened dramatically. Waves exceeding 6 meters struck the bow of the ship with increasing force. Passengers later described feeling the vessel shudder as water crashed over the forward decks. The Estonia's most vulnerable point was its bow visor, a massive hinged door that protected the car deck from flooding. Under the repeated impact of heavy seas, its locking mechanisms began to fail. Steel supports bent. Hydraulic systems strained. Vibrations traveled through the hull. At 1 a.m., the visor finally gave way. It ripped open, plunging the car deck into immediate peril. With no barrier, water flooded inside at a rate the pumps could not overcome. The ship developed a dangerous list almost instantly. Furniture slid violently. Passengers staggered through darkened hallways as alarms blared. The tilt became so severe that people struggled to climb even a few steps. Within minutes, the angle exceeded 30 degrees, an irreversible tipping point for a vessel of its size. As water poured uncontrollably into the car deck, the Estonia lost all stability. The ship rolled further onto its side, trapping hundreds inside slanted compartments and sealed passageways. The vessel sank in less than half an hour, disappearing beneath the waves before many could reach the open decks. Helicopters and rescue boats fought brutal winds and freezing rain to reach survivors scattered across the black water. Most were not wearing thermal protection. Hypothermia set in quickly. The final investigation identified structural design vulnerabilities and inadequate maintenance of the bow locking system. A single compromised component had triggered a chain reaction too violent to stop. In the vast, icy darkness of the Baltic Sea, the Estonia slipped beneath the surface in a matter of minutes, leaving behind one of the most infamous maritime tragedies in modern history. Prinsendam Fire. On October 4, 1980, the Gulf of Alaska, known for its remote isolation and unforgiving waters, became the site of a cruise ship emergency that tested the limits of maritime rescue. The Prinsendam, a Holland-America vessel carrying 524 people, was traveling through open ocean when crew members detected smoke rising from deep within the engine room. Initial attempts to extinguish the source failed as the fire spread along hidden pathways behind bulkheads. The ship's interior began filling with heat and smoke. Cabin lights dimmed. Ventilation systems faltered. Passengers were awakened by the sound of alarms and the distant metallic thud of fire doors sealing shut. With the fire expanding into critical machinery spaces, the captain ordered a full evacuation, a rare and dangerous decision in open ocean. Lifeboats were lowered into swells reaching more than 8 feet. Passengers clung to rails as the ship rolled in the frigid waters. The U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Air Force, and Canadian rescue teams launched one of the largest coordinated maritime rescues in North American history. Aircraft circled above as helicopters hoisted passengers from lifeboats tossed violently by the waves. Others were transferred to passing oil tankers and Coast Guard cutters. By nightfall, flames had engulfed much of the Prinsendam's midsection. Heat radiated from the hull with enough intensity to warp steel. Hours later, the vessel was abandoned entirely, drifting silently across the dark Alaskan waters. In the official inquiry, investigators traced the disaster to inadequate fire suppression capabilities and delayed detection of the initial ignition point. A ship built for exploration had become a drifting inferno, saved only by one of the most complex rescue operations the region had ever seen. Cruise ships represent engineering marvels capable of crossing oceans with thousands aboard. But when a single component fails, when storms hit harder than expected, when fire spreads faster than anyone anticipates, when steel meets rock or steel meets steel, the consequences become unforgettable. If you want to see more investigations into real disasters at sea, make sure to subscribe.